Chapter 10, Understanding Laws Related to Students with Disabilities. The nice thing about this is kind of a flyover because surely you've seen some of this before in SPED 100, but it brings it down to the ground now that it'll affect you as a teacher and someone that's working with kids with learning disabilities. And it does a nice job of simplifying it, yet making it plausible and useful to you as a teacher. And what I'll say about this, you've got to have at least a basic understanding of this. You've got to be able to at least use these verbiage. You got to at least know some of these acronyms. You got to be able to talk the talk in a job interview or with colleagues, and that's what this attempt is. So let's move on to the history of the special education laws. And this textbook, I think, does as nice a job as on anything else here about this. So why are they important here? For one thing, special ed hasn't been around forever. It really was born in 1975 with the first educating handicapped kids. And how did we get there? As I highlighted here, a persistence of many dedicated advocates that laws were passed to provide education for children with disabilities. And that's really code for parents. Parents really drove this. That almost all special ed law was driven by federal court cases that went clear to the Supreme Court, legislation passed at the federal level. And I know, if you've heard me in the other classes, I just have, I have disdain for the federal government's involvement in education because there's absolutely no constitutional basis for it. But they've stuck their nose all the way in here, and to take care of this, they ripped it from the states. They've had to give some of it back to the states. And what's really hard that this text doesn't talk about is all that they promised to fund this 100% as they do so many other things. And yet I heard one time a few years back, they've never funded more than about 15% for any state. So like most pieces of legislation funded by the federal government, it's a mandate without funding. They said to the states, you shall do this, now figure out how to pay for it yourself. And so, like so many things that the federal government does, it was erroneous and deceitful in what they've done. But nonetheless, they're able to care for kids now that have disabilities and include them in the school. And there was always special ed prior to that. It's just that it wasn't provided in the local school. So let's move on here. Important federal laws, regulation, court cases, and that is the foundation of this here. Is this that pertain to students with disabilities are discussed here. However, it is the paramount for teachers to know specific laws, regulations that govern your states. That from in South Dakota. Things are changing all the time, and our Department of Education right now is really active in keeping people involved. And this is how in the State Department of Education. And every time there's changes, they go around the state and put on different seminars. I've been to a ton of these, and you will too. If you're a special ed teacher, you'll be invited and most likely sent to that. Interesting image here of why is this a special child? Well, one thing, most kids at that age can ride two-wheelers here. This is a story here, and I'm just going to jump over that for you and get on to the different laws. So the history of special ed legislation, and here they are, and we're going to tear these apart one at a time. And I'm going to drive you a little bit crazy here because I'm going to drive you a little bit crazy here because I'm going to be flipping back and forth here on so many of these things. So let's start out with 94-142, and this is PL 94-142. And the first thing I want you to do, and this will be right at the top, is talk about that. Okay, and so the first thing is, number one, is Public Law 94-142. I'm going to write it like this. What does 94-142 stand for? Right at the top. Okay, go do that. 94-142. Okay, welcome back. So, education of all handicapped children, 1975, and it's really thought to be the birth of this, because it was the first federal law that says, hear ye, thou shalt. So it was the birth of SPED, and it created a lot of the parts that are still in existence today. So here, I'm going to make this a number 2, your involvement here with 94-142. And here's what they are, and there's a bunch of ones following. So let's look at it like this. Law was passed. It's considered a landmark legislation. So I want you to put that in there. And let me just give you these before you go put these in here for number 2. But it's landmark legislation. And that's a term that I want you to get used to. What is landmark education? Okay, so you put that in there. And then Education of a Children's Act gave students the abilities, the right to a free, appropriate public education. So a FAPE. And I want you to put that under 94-142, a FAPE, a free, appropriate public education. And again, I want you to be familiar with that term, that we, in this field, constantly talk in acronyms, and that's an acronym I want you to be familiar with, is a FAPE. Okay, and so you put that, add that to yours. And prior to the passage of this law in 1975, and again, I don't ever want you to get caught not knowing that that was the year, because that will show your brilliance in the special ed field. But prior to 75, children with disabilities were largely ignored or excluded from attending public school. So again, it wasn't they weren't in school, they weren't in public schools. Okay? And so they were in special schools, they were in county schools and state schools and stuff like that. Okay? And so they weren't part of the public school system. And this also required schools to develop this IEP. And so add that you have to develop an IEP. Add that to this. And this is all under here, right here, these things I'm telling you. And then related services. And I want you to add what those related services are. And they're down here. And you can simply add these. Services are services delivered by special trained professionals that are needed for the student with disability that benefits from special education. Such services include, and here they are, and you will add those under 94-142. Good job. Move on. Now, the next one, early childhood amendments here, 99-457. Again, I want you to be familiar with that, because that question often comes up also. I know I first heard that in graduate school, and it was passed in 1986. So grab these, 1975, 86, 90, 97, 04, part of a good knowledge of special ed are those dates. But we first got early childhood special ed. Prior to that, it was only this. But we started to reach out this way. Now this is going to be number 3 here. But don't do anything until I tell you what to put there. So here's what I want you to put it in there. So this was an amendment to 94-142 from 1975. This amendment was significant because it extended the provision of the law to young children with disabilities ages 3 to 5 of age. Okay, so put that in there, and don't go yet. And focused on 94-142 focused on the individual child with disability. The latest set of amendments focused on family needs and intervention. So know this. This is how it's different. This was more of a focus on family needs and interventions. Oftentimes, family that are born children are born with disabilities, especially severe disabilities, find themselves in kind of a state of crisis. And so this law said, reach out and find those and provide family services to them. And program for infant toddlers all become a reality. While not a mandate, the schools must provide this service to birth through 2. States must establish an interagency for this. So here, then, this one wasn't mandated. This one was 99-457 was that amendment, but this from birth to 2 is not a mandate that schools have provided, but the state has to establish interagency coordinating council to determine how to provide that. And so every state did that, and I've been involved with that also, of working with those programs. And they must specify a statewide system to do that. And again, this is for children that are born into families that have severe disabilities, that this program is for the family interventions. Okay? And so the amendment to 94-142 for birth 3 to 5 district has to provide birth through 2. The district doesn't have to provide it, but a statewide system of some kind. Your state, in our case South Dakota, has to have some way to deliver this to those families. Because a 2-year-old does not need special ed, but the families may need service. And often these referrals come from doctors, caseworkers, social workers. That's how they come to be. It includes definition for children with disability are eligible, individual family service plans. So instead of an IEP, this is where the term IFSP comes from. Please put that in there. And that are required young children, and the child find that requires a baby to be eligible are sought, and a lead agency at each state must be designated to run a child find. State must look for these kids. It's called a child find. Okay, put all that in this one. Go. Okay, here's number 4. And this is 101-476, the Individual with Disabilities Education Act. So it changes for the first time from Education of All Handicapped Children to this, IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And the first was changed in 1990, 15 years later. That's my private school math there. The feds come back and change the name. Now, again, don't do anything until I tell you what to put in here about IDEA. Let's go up here. Lots of stuff here, and this is the one I'm going to drive you crazy on. We're kind of bounce around here on one of these. This one is easy. Here were the changes. Now they changed the name. Start with that. Rename to IDEA. Put that in there. I'm just going to do this. Change to IDEA. And this, 2 new categories, autism and TBI, traumatic brain injury, were added. Prior to that, they didn't exist, and it kind of created a lot of problems because you think of how rampant autism is today. We didn't know what to do with those kids because of the characteristics and symptoms. We called some of them intellectually disabled. We called some of them learning disabled, but we didn't know because they were so different. And then, of course, brain injury was a whole world by itself. So those 2 were added. And then the revision of that year also was the beginning of transition services. Put that in there. And prepare students from school to the world of work. And that's what transition means, as you know from your transition course, and independent living. So 2 things, world of work and independent living. Okay, and the revision also began the provision of assistive technology. So you got name change, 2 new categories, transition services for world of work and independent living, and the inclusion of assistive technology devices had to be part of the IEP. Add that there. Go. Okay, this will be number 5. And this was a revision. And at that time, the revisions were supposed to be every 7 years. That was their thought. Here it is, 97. 7 years later, 04. We haven't seen one since. Okay? So here is this one of 97. Again, known as 105.17. And it's simply the revision, as was this revision, 101.476. And there was a major revision idea, which became known as IDEA Act of 97. The purpose of the law was to broaden, okay, so more federal government involvement to tell the states what to do. Beyond the purpose of a FAPE, now you know what FAPE is. Go ahead and say it to yourself out loud. Correct. Free and appropriate public education, emphasizing special education related services designed to meet students' needs. The 97 revision added that it also must be designated to prepare students for employment and independent living. Okay, so this is a change. Prior to this, it was for academics, but in 97, a big thing said, now it also must prepare students for employment and independent living, including students who have been suspended or expelled from school. That added a new twist. So no, just because their behaviors had them included from school didn't mean they still didn't get their special ed services. New protections, and that's a buzzword now, protections were also provided for students with behavioral challenges. Why? Because they were kicked out of school. Often the behaviors that they would displayed got them kicked out of school, would not be accepted from kids that weren't on IEPs, but would be a change here because a high percentage of these kids were being expelled. Okay? And all those protections were maintained in the 97 original law. They were modified again in 04. 97 many new requirements added the IEP process in order to more thoroughly address the needs. This was the IEP teacher called present levels of performance. So in 97, we had to add PLOP, present levels of performance. Please put that in there with that acronym PLOP. So you remember that, present level of performance. So prior to that, you didn't need to have a PLOP. Now in 97, you had to do a PLOP. And I lived through all this. I finished a master's degree in 93. I was finishing a doctorate degree in school administration in 1997. And the thing you got to know about all these is, for example, when these are passed, it takes 2 years at least for the regulations. So we didn't hear about this from our State Department until 1999 or 2000, and I was at DSU. Okay. So you had to have a PLOP. Include how the disability affects the child's involvement in the progress in the general curriculum. So you had to tell that also for the first time. How did their disability affect their progress in the general curriculum? In addition, the IEP team had to consider the participation of students with disabilities in a statewide and local assessments. So that was the first thing. That was a big, big thing. We all got shook up about it because now you had to justify why or why not were the students participating in the state tests. Okay. If a student could not take that statewide or local assessment, the IEP team needed to specify why. And that never happened before. Had to determine an alternative method. And the way this was the one that really brought a lot of griping is then you had to come up with some alternative type of assessment to show what progress they were making towards the general curriculum goals. So it was a big, big deal that set up here, major revisions. And believe me, the day I went to this, people were screaming and mad, red in the face mad about these, as we often get that way as teachers. 97 for the first time, get this was big, general education teacher was required to participate in the IEP process. First time. Put that in yours. And here, the teacher organizations, code for NEA, had voiced serious concerns that the movement towards inclusion, that they were being expected to provide significant services and accommodation for students with disabilities within their classroom, yet were not involved in the decision process. So with that complaining, guess what? They changed the law. There was also an addition to the focus of the IEC process. Previously, the IEP team addressed the needs of the student alone. With 97, language was added to support school personnel. Okay, now you don't hear much about that. Let me go on. Consequently, if teachers stated within the IEP process that they needed additional training, and this went with autism because we didn't know what to do with those, and more so, where this really came out to be is these behavior kids we could no longer kick out of school that we couldn't handle in school. And so we may be able to say, Uncle, and a lot of us were too proud to say it, but if you said in this process, I need additional training, it would be part of the process so that you could handle these kids. And then it had to be addressed in the IEP process. Have you heard about that before? Schools don't like that one. Okay, put that in your part here. Also, 97 required the IEP team to consider the strengths of the student. That was new language, and hence the education child. Additional requirements process included addressing special factors such as positive behavioral supports that we studied here last time. The language needs to have students with also with limited English proficiency. That was the first time for language for that, 97. Like instruction in Braille and use of Braille unless the IEP team determined otherwise. Communication needs of the students, provision of assistive technology devices, all in 97. Put that all in there, please. Go. All right, and number 6 will be this. In 2004. So we should have had 111, and it didn't happen. But this was President Bush. He wanted to be involved with the federal government interfering in state business. So he signed this provision into law. Again, calling IDEA, and this was 108-456. 456. Okay, we got a little discrepancy here. 456 and 446. I don't know which one that is. Okay, and the final regulations for this weren't done until 06. The same thing, in 06, I got to go and listen to the state of South Dakota tell me what this meant, what changes came out of this. Just a second, let me check and see what this is. Here, I'm just Googling this to see which one it is. Let's go on this government ones and see what they know about it. If they can clear that up. And Dr. Lerner got a little hurried in her textbook here. Nope, doesn't seem to tell here. Let's go back another one and see if somebody else can tell you. Surely Wikipedia will know. They know everything. This is the one that some of my colleagues would chastise you for using. Is that it? 476? Isn't that interesting? Takes you all through that. Let me try one more here. Okay, here's the actual government website, and I'm going to assume this is correct then. What they have is 108.446. Okay. So I'm going to change this. Hang on. Okay, now I have it for you, and as I said, Dr. Lerner got a little ahead of herself here, as they're calling it 456. The feds say it's 446, but as I was ranting here, President Bush signed this, and here was a big change: zero reject. So please add that here under this one. And it's okay to say that President Bush signed this, and then a little about what zero reject is. And you can use this. Now, let me tell you a little something about zero reject that I think is interesting. One of the questions we in the interview to the College of Ed is about the principles, the 6 pillars or principles of IDEA, and one is zero reject. And the question we ask is, what does that mean to you? And I look you in the eye and say, what does that mean to you as a teacher? And almost regularly, this is what I get. That means I won't be able to reject anybody. I won't be able to say, no, I can't reject anybody. Well, yes, but you'll never be able to make that decision. That'll, as our classroom teacher, we're never going to ask you that. What it means to you is this: you're going to have kids in your class that have severe disabilities. You're going to have kids in your school, in your program, in your hallways that have severe disabilities, because zero reject doesn't only include like Timothy versus the Board of Education, the severe profound kids, but these kids we're going to talk about down here also, and that is these kids that are hard to keep in school because they're scary and dangerous and misbehave. Okay, so that's what zero reject means. FAPE is provided to all students, even those students who are suspended or expelled from school. Students who are suspended from school for for more than 10 days must have access to reach progress to this. So here it is. Here's what came in 97 or in 04. If they are suspended for more than 10 days, and that usually includes drugs, alcohol, firearms, anything like that, or a combination of things, you cannot say bye-bye. You have to provide some kind of a service. And what we did in Sioux Falls is we set up an alternative program to house these kids. Now, the hard thing was, number one, getting teachers that wanted to teach there and run that program. And two, how to provide a service there off-site. But if they're more than 10 days, they have to have access and reach progress in the general curriculum and any other IEP services that they were entitled to. Okay. Also, they would receive functional behavioral assessments, which we talked about. We kind of analyze what's the functional behavior, and then any kind of behavioral interventions, the BIP, Behavior Intervention Plan, and modifications designed to address that behavior violation so that it does not reoccur. And that is often wishful thinking. But that all had to be done if they were going to be suspended for more than 10 days. Now, why they brought a gun or brought crack cocaine to school, I don't know what this functional behavior assessment looks like, but you get to house them someplace for quite a while. You got this one, free or blank education, free appropriate. Right. So all that in there. Now, key provisions of the special ed law. Key provisions. Well, this you know, the IEP. And let's move on to this. And this is number 7. Here, and this is the one I'm going to drive you crazy with because I'm going to be all over the place. So first of all, what are the provisions about the IEP? Is a mandate of IDEA that you knew that if determined they have a disability, they are on IEP. Is written statement of a child with disability is developed, reviewed, and revised in accordance with the law. Ed services and settings for students with disabilities are based on the needs of the student and determined by the IEP team. And you knew that. What are the needs of the student and determined by the IEP team? IEP is a hallmark of good planning. Okay, there's some jargon for you. hallmark, how about that word, and it has been in existence since the inception of 75. Is developed by at least yearly, okay? Put this in there, please. At least yearly, it has to be reviewed and address the educational implications of evaluation. The IEP includes a child's PLOP, child's functional performance, the annual goals for the child, the placement, service of the goals. Can be met where the student can receive meaningful benefit. IDEO4 allows 15 states to apply for waivers to do students' IEPs with parental consent every 3 years. Or key transition points. South Dakota is not one of those. But 15 states have applied to the Fed saying, can we do them every 3 years if that would suit the students' need? And you know who that suited? The kids with more severe disabilities. Okay, and then they have a sample IEP here for you. And then we go into this, these special considerations in the IEP. And here they are. And let me show you what this is going to be. Now we're going to jump off this page and come back. So number 7 you already put in here. Let's go to number 8. Here's those special considerations. And these are number 8. And they come from right here. Figure 10.2. And that's why I have that there. And you just bring an abridged version of each of these. This positive behavior intervention supports what, remember we studied what a high percentage of these kids have behavior problems. So now part of your life as our special ed teacher is continually doing this. These interventions and supports. If their behavior impedes their learning. So that's that one. And then English language. Consider the language needs. And you knew that. And then these, visual impairments, hearing impairments, and assistive technology. In case of a child who may need assistive technology, consider those needs. So you bring all those in. And that's number 8. Number 9 is this IEP planning team. And then we're going to move up here, right here. And this is from 10.3. And the first is this. And this is number 9, this page. And you're going to bring this in. First, what is no unilateral action in special education? You tell about what that is about. And then, what about this multidisciplinary team? Is this. Let's see if I find that. Students in placement of students must be multidisciplinary evaluation team. Evaluation, and I hate that word because it's a word that we use to clobber parents with and to beat people up. Multidisciplinary evaluation. What is that? Nobody knows, and it's just, we got to come up with a better word. But many prongs, many fingers, and many parts of evaluation. That's the kind of teacher speak we use, like I said, that just drive parents crazy. But there must be a multidisciplinary evaluation conducted by a group of individuals, and no one individual can do this by themselves. Okay. Instead, a group of individuals must conduct this, a variety of assessments, and you know that. And then the team with the parent determine the disability of the student and whether the disability results in adverse effect. Okay, so here is a jargon that you've got to be able to speak about, and that is, does this disability have an adverse effect on educational performance? Because you could determine there's a disability and not have this. Doesn't happen very often, but it could be. But that's a question. There's a question on the test about this. Does the disability result in an adverse effect on educational performance and what the needs of the students are? For example, a student has speech-language problems. Is it critical that that individual who has expertise in certification licensure be part of the evaluation team? So here are those members, you know, and what the role of each of those are. And that comes back here with number 9. Okay. Thus, the IEP team charged with examining the needs of the student, planning goals, determining how the goals can be met, and a critical IEP team consider the whole range of student needs. And again, I'm going to ask you to do that number here, number 10, and this is from figure 10.4. This is 10.3, 10.2. Okay, so we got them all covered here, and there they are, right here. And these you're going to have to come up with yourself because they just list them for you here. After the IEP meeting is over, the student member's responsibility continue every day. The team members do. Then you, my special ed teacher, our special ed teacher, get to carry this out. Everybody else goes home. The IEP team members are responsible for implementing the IEP and monitoring it. So here's the thing, 2 more jargons that you got to be able to say and scare parents with. Implement the IEP and monitor it. And monitor just means keep track, see if they're gaining. If you say we're going to go from 30 words a minute reading to 60, are they making progress on that? Progress reports must be provided to the family in accordance with the school district's reporting system. When the student is not making progress, up to the team members to call a new IEP team meeting and determine what's to be changed. Now, let me just talk about that a second. Get done with what you're doing and then come back here, and I want to just tell you about this. What do you do if they're not making progress? What do you do? Say, for example, you said they're going to go from 30 to 60, and you find out, 6 months into it, 3 months into it, and they're still at 30. What do you do? And I'm going to do this. I'm going to bring you here, and down here I've got a couple other things. I want to make this here. What? You will do this now. Okay, respond to this. Okay, and how you do this is just simply hit reply. Don't start your own one, just reply. Everybody reply to that. And I'll take you through these other ones later. And I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to make that number 11 is respond to that. All right, now I'm going back here to here, because that's where we left off, number 7. And I'm going to bring you back here and say, what about these non-discriminatory evaluation procedures? Okay, right here, and this is going to be number 12. Non-discriminatory evaluation procedures, and we're never quite sure what that means. It's some more jargon. If you would use that term out of this setting, it has no meaning. So in our setting, we all act like we know what this is, but let's just take a peek behind the curtain here. It says this: no one single measure or assessment is utilized as a sole criterion. It can't be one thing. Determine whether it has a disability. And that's all we're doing. Determining if they have a disability. Not what to teach or anything like that. We're still determining that. So that's what this is about. Once you determine they have a disability, then go ahead. Drive yourself crazy. Use whatever you want. But in determining this, remember we have to have this multifaceted process. Further, the school district must assure that within the evaluation process, only technically sound instruments are utilized. Now again, I say to you, what the heck does that mean? But you better put that in your notes to show that you think you know what it is. And then criteria established, I require that the school districts ensure that this, assess the other evaluations, those types of things. And please abridge these, but I'm charging you with that right there for, still with number 12. So materials are selected and better as not to be discriminatory. I got some stories about that too, but racial cultural bias. Assessment provided a language form most likely to you accurate information. And my experience was student couldn't read at all. An 8th grade student couldn't read at all. It had a first grade level, and the school district told me, oh, he's new to this country. He's very fluent in Spanish. He can read Spanish. So I asked the world, could I have somebody evaluate his Spanish reading, and it was worse than it was in English. So it wasn't that at all. I wanted to say they apologized, but they didn't. Assessments are used for a purpose of which the assessments are measured valid or reliable. And do you know what that means? Assessments are administered by trained and knowledge professional, and that'll be you. This is you. Assessments are administered in accordance with any instruction provided by the producer. Such assessments means, did you read the directions? Are provided by the child in all areas of suspected disabilities. In other words, if it's speech, you assess that. Hearing, vision, whatever it is, you assess all those areas. Okay, come back. Assessment and other evaluations be tailored specific areas of need. Designed a single intelligence quotient. Okay. Which is what? IQ. Also be selected and administered as to ensure that if the assessment is administered, the child has impaired thing, then they have this problems. We know the students and their needs change. Therefore, you like that? Therefore, requires that at least every 3 years or more, determine the parent as determined by the parent, the school district personnel. So every 3 years, you have to review the whole case. Their whole case study. We've put that on the IEP. We went through that. But every 3 years. Every year, review the IEP. Every 3 years, review the entire case. Question on the test about it. And more often determined by the, or more often, and this will drive you crazy sometimes because this would be me driving you nuts with this, or more often, it's determined by the parent or the school district personnel. So I'd be that jumpy, crabby parent that want them tested more to see if they're making progress. But the school, which is you, can also ask for this more often. But federal law 04 IDEA says at least every 3 years. And get this, better add this, but parental consent still has to be included for any evaluation. Team meeting is held after the evaluation occurs to review the results. No one person responsible for all components of the evaluation. Rather, here it is. Can you please say that out loud to yourself again? Yes, multidisciplinary process. Okay, good job. Because I want you to have a good working knowledge of that particular term. Okay, so now we're over here with LRE. This is number 13. And here's the things you're going to add to that. First of all, what is LRE? Give that a little definition. There it is. And this, you gotta use this. This is in here someplace too. Let me see if I can find that. Right here. Provision of the idea that to the maximum extent appropriate, students with disabilities are educated with their peers without disabilities. So there you go. That's the jargon. Hang on to that. Maximum extent appropriate, students with disabilities are educated with their peers without disabilities. Now, go ahead and say that out loud. Read that out loud so you can hear yourself say it, because you're going to want to explain that to somebody, someday to a parent. Oh, LRE, maximum extent appropriate, the students with disabilities are educated with peers without disabilities. Again, that's not parent speak at all. You'll drive them nuts with that, but good teacher speak there. The premise of the LRE is the placement decisions about the student's educational setting should be based on, I didn't have to tell you this because you knew this, on the individual needs. IEP team must consider the student's level of academic achievement, which is the test that you administered, and the functional performance. You know what that is? Functional performance, that's for kids that are more a little bit lower, and develop goals to address the individual needs. Based on the information, the IEP team must determine the goals can be met in what specific educational settings to be meaningful benefit. Okay? Let me show you where we're going to hook you up here. Here we call it this 4-prong. There's a question on the test that specifically asks about 4-prong test for LRE. So first one is the educational benefit. The meaningful benefit of this. Some educators interpret the LRE feature to the law to mean that students should always be educated in the general classroom. Go further advocating philosophy of full inclusion. Again, the law doesn't say that. Actually, the word inclusion does not appear in the law. But some states, some districts went there, said, oh, full inclusion, no special ed room. Full inclusion is a philosophy that goes further, proposing that all children, regardless of sphere of disability, are to be in the regular classroom. Criterion for determining LRE were established by Rachel Holland case. Okay, you might need that. That might be really smart if you could throw that out sometime. The Rachel Holland case. You'd be an impressive. Well, we'd be impressed with you as a candidate for our teaching position if you'd say, "Oh, LRE was established in the Rachel Holland case." And what is that? Would you say? A child with intellectual disabilities, and went to school in Sacramento. Her parents wanted her to be educated in the regular classroom setting. But the school district believed that it was more appropriate to educate her in the special ed classroom. The school district lost the case, and the criteria were established as follows. So this case set the precedent for LRE, and here they are. Will the child derive educational benefit from the placement considered? And this is what I'm going to give you. This is, where are we at here, 14. And I'm going to ask you to address each of these here. Look at those, and they come from here. Will the child benefit from the placement? Will the student derive non-educational benefit from this placement? Examples used in the case were friendships, improved self-confidence, exciting for learning, and some of these are a real stretch. Okay, and 3, well, okay, so what will there be detriment because of the student is disruptive, distracting others? And this, I like this because we never really talked about this before. Will they be disruptive? Big thing with me, especially since once I had kids in school, gosh, I mean, I'm all for inclusion, but don't let them suck up the teacher's time and, distract everybody. So you have to consider that. And then what's the cost? Will the placement burden the school district's funds by adversely impacting services available to our other children? And that doesn't mean like if they're in the regular classroom or not. That means are we going to send them off to some school a long ways away for special stuff? And this is new also because it used to be you couldn't consider this. And these are the ones that send these clear to the Supreme Court. But that's this, where you talk about those. Okay? All right. Procedural safeguards. This will be number 14 here. Or number 15 will be here. Procedural safeguards. And again, get familiar with that term. Can you say that out loud to yourself now? Yes, procedural safeguards, because you want to be able to have that terminology too. You want to be able to use that word when you're throwing jargon around with parents and other professionals. So let's go look at what that would be. I'm going to give you this as one of the clips. Here's that 4-prong thing, and this is, let me, before we go on here, let me just finish telling you about the Rachel Holland case here. Later that year, Holland was decided the same circuit ruled differently in another student applying 4-prong tests. Just let me read this to you, please. Ryan K. was a 15-year-old with Tourette syndrome and ADHD who was also engaged in incidents of sexual harassment. Because of escalations in his behavior, including an assault on a staff member, yikes, that will always be kind of a deal breaker. The district recommended that Ryan be placed at STARS, a temporary away from regular school. The program provided a more structured environment and provided more individualized attention. Parents originally agreed, but then changed their mind and filed lawsuit, which they have the right to do, for allegedly violation of the rights of due process. Meaning, you know what this means? Why they violated this? What that is? Here's what that means, and this, hopefully you won't deal with this, but you could. It means the school district said, we're putting him at Stars, and the parents said it was okay, and then they come back and said, you know what? We never really got to have a hearing. We never got to go through due process. You never really listened to us. And remember, parents can have the right to withdraw their consent. That's what this is. My guess is they withdrew their consent, and school district said, tough. He's going to Stars because assault and sexual harassment. Okay. So we come on here and say the parents believe that Ryan could be educated in a mainstream setting if the school provided a personal aid for him. So that's what they were asking for. Let's just put somebody with him in regular school. Why would they want that? Well, they want him in the local neighborhood school. The Stars thing, I bet we're going to ship him across town or out of town or something. And so they want him to be right here in the neighborhood school. So just hire somebody. So go clear to the courts. Court determined the Stars was the least restrictive environment, applying the Holland test as follows. Ryan's disruptive behavior kept him from learning. He derived, at best, only minimal non-academic benefits from his previous settings. The record indicated that his presence in classes in regular school had an overwhelmingly negative effect on teachers and students. Thank you. He was dangerously aggressive. Thank you. Schools had a special obligation to ensure the students, other students were out of harm's way, and his sexual harassment also were problematic. Okay, so that's how that goes down. Now, let me go back up here with you with Rachel Holland. Why do you think this came to be? Rachel Holland here. District believe that more appropriate in the special ed classroom. Why do you suppose this? Why would the parents, I mean, this is a little bit unusual, why would the school want her to be an educator in a special ed classroom? What do you think their position was? Well, here's my experience was, it's a little bit like down here with this guy, is that it was just easier to do. They had she did better there. They were more equipped to deal with her there. My guess is what they're not talking about here either is Rachel probably took a lot of the teacher's time, and so that's why the school wanted her in the classroom. So there. Now let's go to procedural safeguards. Okay. The cornerstone of IDEA is the right of parent or the district to disagree. Okay, so this is when you start working with parents, especially at the beginning, and you talk about parents' rights and procedural safeguards, which you already said that word for me, is they have the right to disagree. Both the parent and you, the school district. Like we just saw back here with these cases, that the school district can disagree. Parent wants them to stay in the regular classroom with a teacher's aide. School district disagreed. That's a procedural safeguard. Okay? Please be able to explain that to somebody, what procedural safeguards are. School district and parents all want the same thing for the children, but sometimes they may not agree on how to achieve those goals. May not agree. And even though they all have the best in the mind, we may not agree. There are safeguards to protect the rights of the students, and school personnel. Parents are always encouraged to resolve their differences through informal measures under this called mediation. Okay, so instead of going to court, could we go through mediation? Mediation is a more formal and less legalistic procedure than going to a process hearing. It requires impartial individual who is not an employee of the district or listen to both sides. So please put these things under procedural safeguards. You can disagree, may not agree, mediation. And what mediation means. Mediation is provided at no cost to the parents. In addition, designates a requirement that prior to the due process or hearing, the school district will convene a meeting with the parents and a relevant member of the IEP team to resolve these differences. So you have a meeting, not the IEP meeting, but some kind of a meeting to resolve the difference. And you, my friend, special ed teacher, will be in the center of this. Okay. If informal procedures and mediation still fail to resolve this, then due process system is provided, the specific procedures outlined, accompanying regulations. States then determine the specific procedure for who is the hearing officer. That's the next step, is a hearing officer. And how the process hearing is conducted, list of procedures. And I'm giving this to the steps to take when there's dispute with parents and districts. Okay, that's procedural safeguards, and your school must have this laid out, what to do if we can't agree, either through mediation or a hearing officer. Okay, school district meet, let's see, what do I have this here? School district, parent can file a complaint, parent can request mediation, parent can request the due process. Can you please put those things under here also, procedural safeguards? Okay. All right, let's move on here. Contentious issues. Here we are for that. These contentious issues. And here's number 16. And I'm going to show you these. Here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And let's take a peek at that, because I'm going to ask you to address each one of those. Here's these contentious. First of all, rights of parents. For the first time in a reauthorization, the rights of parents and students were reduced, particularly in the areas of transition, due process rights, and discipline issues. So it was a huge deal, unbelievable, that the parents' rights were rolled back. And then transition. Planning had previously been required at the age 14. In 04, it was changed to 16. And this has flopped quite a few times. So just know this, in 04, it was 16. Make sure you get that in there. Attorney's fees, within due process right, if a parent files a hearing that could be construed as a frivolous, parents' attorneys or the parent will be required not only to pay their attorney fees, but also fees of the school district. So if you're messing around, and you'll see parents do that, they may get to pay the fees. How about discipline in 04? In the area of discipline, if the behavior is not a manifestation of the disability, remember what manifestation termination is? The school district may move the child to a recommended disciplinary setting regardless of whether the parent agrees. Did you know that? So if they're tearing up the place, like the kid that was sexually assaulting people and assaulted staff, we may not wait around for a parent's agreement. Parents' recourse is a file a due process hearing, but in the meantime, the student's placement is recommended a disciplinary setting. So in that time that they're filing this, they still might be in the alternative setting. And then this response to intervention, which we studied, another change has the evaluation procedure of this. So I'm going to let you bring that in. So that's number 16. And I'll straighten those out for you. And then number 17 are these. These special things for students with ADHD. And that was added, you remember, because that was only added in 1990. Now that was autism. This one here, this is, if it's ADHD, you remember, they're eligible under other health impaired. Here's the catch with this, you guys. This may change, if they ever reauthorize, this may change, in that there would be a category for ADD and ADHD. The problem is it's so subjective. That's so many of us have some glimpses of this. So many kids now are displaying at least mild parts of this, that I really believe that's why we don't have this yet, is that it's too subjective. So law describes other health impaired when applied to children with ADHD as heightened alertness to environmental stimuli and results in individual limited alertness, respect in the educational environment. Other health impaired. I once certified a kid under other health impaired because he was diabetic. He no longer qualified for special ed services under learning disability because his achievement had went up too high over his IQ. His mother cried and just couldn't imagine him not being in my class. And I knew he was a diabetic, so I made a case that the swings in his moods and attention based on his sugar fluctuations was an adverse effect on his learning. And I never heard a thing from it. I wrote IEP from that, and it worked. Child with AD also may be eligible for special services under existing categories of special education and attention, such as learning disabilities or emotional disturbance. And that's what often happens is instead of this, they also have these other things. So you don't have this a lot based on what we saw previously. It's because so often they have characteristics of learning disabilities or emotional disturbance. So that is what you're doing here for 16 under educational services. And then 504, child with ADHD may be eligible for services under this legislation, even if the child is not eligible for special ed. Do you know that? Have you talked about this in SPED 100? Mandates that an agency receiving federal funds must provide reasonable accommodations. And as we'll see a little bit later, this is the one we go to court on, is what's reasonable. So know this, if, according to 504, the child is found to have a physical or mental impairment, it limits the major life activities such as learning, the school must make an individualized determination. The child's educational needs and reasonable accommodations must be played in here. It must be in the general classrooms. Okay, here's the kicker. Here's the one that you got to be able to verbalize to a parent or a colleague. Students who are eligible for 504 have a disability, but the disability does not adversely impact educational performance. Remember, there's a question on the test about this. They have disability. You can see it. That's what other health impaired falls under. Even kids with learning disabilities, sometimes, if you can show that it affects them, but not adversely enough, they can have this. An example, a student with ADHD would be eligible for this plan if there's no adverse effect on educational performance. So they're hyper, have attention problems, but they're still passing, they're still getting decent grades. If there's adverse effect, however, then the student would be on an IEP instead. And that's what you did for that. How about these other laws? Let's take a look at those now. Oh, let me send you these first. These are the two I have now. So this will be number 18. One about Mark. And this will be number 19 about Jesse. And this is discussion. And that's where I'm going to ask you to come back here to our page on chapter 10, and I have them right here. Let me just read Jesse to you, and you'll respond again by simply hitting reply for each of these, and then it's okay to discuss with each other, not only with me. Jesse's mother is concerned when Jesse fails kindergarten. She goes into school and asks the kindergarten teacher for an evaluation for her child. The kindergarten teacher asks her to wait to see how she does the next year. When Jesse gets to first grade, he continues to struggle. That semester, Jesse's mother asks for a case study. The first grade teacher tells her to wait and see how he does in their response to this intervention program that they're in. At the end of the year, Jesse has done poorly, but moves into second grade, where he continues to fall further behind. What should be done here? So you got two cases like that of what should be done, and you respond to that. Okay. So here are these other laws. No Child Left Behind, FERPA, 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, and ADA. Okay, so let me take you to these, what we're going to do with this. And this will be number 20. Govern the rights of students, must also be cognizant, how about that word, of how laws governing all students impact students' disabilities. The most important law governing all students, No Child Left Behind Act of '01, the latest authorization of Elementary Second Act, No Child Left Behind, resulted in massive changes. So get this, and this was President Bush, again, forcing federal government decision-making on states, even though they have no constitutional right to do it. But it was massive changes to the entire field of education, including special ed. School personnel struggle to meet the requirements of this, which looks at all students and at what the level achieve as compared to the grade level peers, while at the same time it also addresses the individual needs of students as a cornerstone of this. No Child Left Behind focuses on these major requirements. Here they are. Highly qualified teachers, accountability for results of all students, including the AYP, the adequate yearly progress. Okay, so you respond to this. The special ed teachers not only have certification in SPED, but also are highly qualified in the core academic subjects if they are a sole provider of that instruction. Okay, this is the one where teachers sat their hair on fire and screamed and threatened schools and everybody because, say for example, you're teaching history in the high school to kids with special ed and you're the only one teaching them history. No Child Left Behind said you had to pass the praxis. You had to have background in that. Prior to that, it wasn't so. But here, you had to have core academic somebody that they are a sole provider. Okay, that sent people screaming, running for the door. Teacher providing consultation, collaboration in the classroom regarding this. The teacher must possess certification in special ed. If the special ed teacher provides instruction for students, take alternative assessments, teacher must be qualified in this. Each state must establish certification standards for teachers and therefore must establish a mechanism. Okay, so you can see here it's a little clumsy. If a student in Title I is being taught 4 weeks, a teacher is not considered highly qualified, then must notify the parents of this. So it was really clumsy. Qualified teachers do not apply to teacher hired or working in a private hired by or working at private elementary schools or private secondary schools. And again, that caused people to go crazy and go screaming and running for the door. Okay. And then accountability part was special educators have long been responsible for assuring that students with disabilities gain meaningful benefits as a result of their special ed. Essential accountability is the expectation of all students. All students must make adequate yearly progress in reading, math, and science. And that's important that you know that. Please put that in there. Scores are disaggregated on a specific group of students. Students with disabilities may be disaggregated group, meaning you could break down in your school just the special ed students and they all had to be making AYP. And again, that sent people screaming and bleeding and crying. Students with disabilities may be disaggregated for that. The number of students that state has determined as the minimum size of that group. Data is disaggregated for students by poverty. Okay, so please put this in there. Here's the groups. Poverty levels, race, disability, and ELL. So those are the 4 groups that had to also, your whole school did, but those 4 groups by themselves had to be making annual AYP, annual yearly progress, according to each group separately. Students must take state-determined assessments and then state compiles results of the tests. Latest adoption of core standards. The majority of states are revising their states to do this, and that's why there hasn't been reauthorization, because nobody's quite sure what to do with that. Each state must report information back to the school district. And now you kind of see why there became cheating and scandals and stuff like that. Yeah, now you know why. Also reporting the school district's results in the public via newspaper and internet. So you have to report that. And these are all, you go on your websites to your schools in South Dakota, you should be able to find their state scores. Disability team determines if the student can take the assessments with or without assessment. And that'll be you. You'll be spearheading that as this person running the IEP meeting. Does this student, should they take these or not? Because if they don't, as we already saw, they have to have some kind of an assessment. And they get the accommodation. If you knew this, the student takes the test with accommodations. The IB team must determine that specific accommodation and should mirror those with instruction. So it's like this. Whatever accommodations they get for tests and instruction and regular, they in their classrooms, they get those on a standardized test. So if they get the test read to them in the classroom, they get standardized tests. They get longer time, whatever it is, they get them the same. But no more than 1% of these students with the most significant cognitive disabilities may take alternative assessments. No more than 1% can be excused. Department of Ed is also allowing an additional 2% of students with disabilities to take a modified assessment based on this. Okay, and 2% of subgroup. All right. Final regulations that govern how states measure students in groups, 2% of groups are this. Can you please take an abridged version? Nah, don't worry about this. You don't have to worry about that. No Child Left Behind holds schools accountable to ensure that students attend schools that are safe. Each state shall establish and implement a policy of student attending a persistently dangerous school or becomes a victim of violent crimes is allowed to attend a safe school. And we have that now. It's called open enrollment in most states. So what happens is the kids that attend those kind of schools often come from the poor communities where they don't have the means to get to the private schools. That's the whole idea behind vouchers, is that these kids that are in these violent schools could now go to religious private schools. And again, it sends us teachers setting our hair on fire and screaming and crying because we don't think they should be able to do that. There. So that is that. Okay, now let's look at this 504 again. For 504, the Rehab Act is discrimination on the basis of a disability. 504 also provides reasonable accommodations. As I said, what is that term? So this was the amendments of 08, amended the definition of a disability. Long-term, the term disability means physical or mental impairment, and sustainability limits one or more major life activities individuals. Major activities include, are not limited to, and this is number 21, is you bring this in. What are these major life activities that could be limited? Performing manual tasks, seeing, hearing, eating, sleeping, walking, those are all considered. The exception is for a person who has a vision problem, can be corrected with eyeglasses. This doesn't apply. 504, an appropriate education means education comparable to education of other students without disabilities. Unlike IDA, that defines appropriate education as one that meets the individual needs. Students with disabilities may be eligible for provisions of 504, yet not eligible for services under this. Okay, 504 provides a student have the same access to other students, such as physical accessibility to the building and accommodations of instruction assessment. So it has to do a little bit with that. So now let's go to here, number 21. Number 22 is this, ADA. School personnel must also be aware that the laws govern the rights of any individual who becomes a school setting. Physical, this one, that's what ADA is, physical and program accessibilities. Who need this. ADA of 90 broaden the scope of services. This legislation prohibits employers from discriminating against a person with a disability who is able to perform essential functions of the job. Employers must make reasonable accommodations for employees. And this law applies to businesses that employ 15 or more workers Also requires that public transportation be accessible. Local areas must provide alternative transportation if it's not. New buildings must be accessible. Telephone companies have to provide this. Problem is these new smartphones have kind of blown up the telephone part of it. But please bring that in about ADA. That was there. And now number 22 will be FERPA. And again, I'm going to ask you to say that out loud to yourself. Go ahead. FERPA. And it's Family, Education, Rights, and Privacy. And this is what I want you to record about this. It's a protection of students' records, formerly known as the Buckley Amendments. And you may see that, you may hear of that, the Buckley Amendments, but it's to protect student records. It's the FERPA. It applies to all educational agencies that receive funds administered by the Secretary of Ed, means the feds. So if your agency, which all schools take Fed money, you have to abide by this. Educational records are those specific to the student that are maintained by the agency, which is the school. They may include handwritten and printed materials. So we don't tell you that at first, but even handwritten notes are subject to this protection. And it could be computer media, video or audio tape, film, microfilm, microfiche, email, even email are subject to this protection. Exceptions to those records include records that are maintained by educational personnel that are not revealed to anyone else. Okay, that's a little sticky. These records are known as sole possession records because when this first came out, they said these weren't protected. And they had to go back and say, oh yeah, if you jot notes at your desk, you don't have to turn those over to parents. Examples of sole possession include records created and kept in a law enforcement unit, employment records, medical records, stuff like that. FERPA requires that school personnel must obtain written permission from a parent or guardian prior to disclosing the records to a third party. So that's where this gets a little sticky. Is can other teachers see? It'll be real easy for outside people, but can other teachers access this? A third party outside of the public school. Because I got to admit to you, more than once did I go down and look through files of kids without permission. And know the secretary in that office always was a little nervous about that. So what we did, we had a form in there to sign your name. It said I was in this file today. And she went through the thousands that we had and had a form in each one that she wanted you to at least sign in the date that you were digging in somebody's files. There are exceptions to the rule. Specifically, schools can disclose information to this. For instance, protect health and safety. Okay, and teachers will generate information for a student's record. Most will be considered temporary. There's a question on the test about that, about what's temporary. But some part of it may be a student's permanent record. Temporary records are records that are only kept until the student is out of school in a designated period of time, usually about 5 years. Permanent records are maintained with the district for many years. Special ed records are considered temporary. That answers your question on the test. Now, case law, here's the cases we're going to go over, and I think I'm going to shift this to our project and let you guys be part of this. But let me just tell you about case law. And I told you, so much of special ed is framed from case law, especially landmark cases that we looked at right at the beginning. Laws and regulations are ambiguous on specific issues. The courts become involved. You may have learned earlier that both parents and school district personnel go to due process. When a decision is rendered, one party may have deemed to have won the case. The other party will be dissatisfied, decide whether they wish to appeal the case to a higher level. Ultimately, in a case, may move through the system, and very few will go to the Supreme Court. Relatively speaking, few cases pertaining to special ed are heard at the Supreme Court. Those cases, however, have become the law of the land. Cases are this. So here, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to assign you this. I'll get over there. But here's what you want to be able to come out at the end, be able to look at these things and match them up, because I'm going to ask you on each case to come up with a one-liner like this. What's the one-line outcome of your case? You can tell a story, tell those story, but the first thing is a one-liner. So here's a sample. Can you match these up with those cases? Okay, so that's going to be our project, and hopefully everybody participates. And then the last part here is application of the law, and it gives you some stuff here where you read through this. So who current law here. I'm going to give you this here also in Eclipse. Okay. And then keeping current. Oh, where did that go? It's back here. Keeping current is down here. Ways to keep current. Become active in your professional organizations. Participate in workshops. Download and keep copies of federal laws. Familiarize yourself with State Department Ed laws and other critical websites. Okay. Oh, that's a match for those up here. Can you match those up? Those. Those.